Hi, I'm Shauna Barnes with Grant Halliburton Foundation, and today I am joined by Dr. Tabatha Chansard. Dr. Chansard is a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in child, adolescent, and young adult anxiety. And so today we're going to talk about test anxiety. Dr. Chansard is also the author of Conquer Anxiety Workbook for Teens and Ultimate Self-Love Workbook for Teen Girls. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Chansard.
Happy to be here.
So to start, we get a lot of questions about test anxiety from parents, especially just as testing kind of ramps up. Can you tell us a little bit about what is test anxiety?
Yeah, it's something, I obviously deal with it a lot in, middle school, high school, even college-age kids. Test anxiety typically comes from a sense of pressure around doing well on the exam. So while anyone can have it, I would say I see it the most in kind of high-functioning, perfectionistic type, kind of internally motivated, driven kiddos, which is great because they work hard, they want to do well, they care about their performance, but the brain sometimes interprets that sense of pressure, whether it's external or internal, as a threat. And so when the brain interprets, a external event like a test as a threat, we start to go into a fight or flight response. And that's where the problems occur. So when the brain is in a fight or flight response, what happens is it's going to send all of its resources to the parts of the brain and body that it needs to either fight that threat or run away from that threat or manage that threat, which means it steals resources from the parts of the brain that would do well on an exam. Critical thinking, problem solving, working memory, memory retrieval of learned information. Those are all the parts of the brain we need to do well on the exam. And when we are in that fight or flight response, the brain just doesn't have access to that as well. And then it becomes very vicious because the child will experience that almost mind going blank on the exam as, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh no, I'm going to fail. And they start catastrophizing, which then can often lead from just kind of test anxiety to test panic and feeds on itself.
Gotcha. So the test anxiety is a struggle that the kids have, and then it almost leads to this cycle because it ends up kind of causing them to not perform as well on tests, which then increases the anxiety, and then we just
self-fulfilling prophecy situation. Yes.
So some of our kids will come and tell us that they're stressed out about a big test that they have coming up, or standardized testing or something, but not all kids will verbalize that. So what are some signs that parents can look out for that their child or teen might be struggling with test anxiety?
Yeah, I think, one thing we can look at is grade performance. So sometimes if you see your kid doing really well in school, their grades on their homework is fine, their quiz grades are fine, but then you just see these big tanks in their tests, that might be one indicator that they're struggling to demonstrate their knowledge at the test time, which would probably be from anxiety. But then also behaviorally, cramming, staying up really late studying for tests. Some kids feel that physical sense of anxiety. It'll shut down their appetite, their sleep will suffer. Crankiness, irritability is big with the teens when they're struggling with anything.
Yes.
But definitely if you see a shift in their behavior, their demeanor, their ability to care for themselves around test time and studying for the test, that would be an indicator.
Okay, that's great to know. And then what can parents do at home that can kind of assist their teen with managing this test anxiety?
Yeah. So, when I'm talking to teens or parents, I like to remind people that we can't access our emotions usually directly. If someone were to say to you, oh, just don't worry about something, it's a test, no big deal, just don't worry about it, that would be very frustrating and irritating. And so we never want to we can't really attack the feeling directly. I wish it were that easy. But we do know through research, through psychological, understanding and science that there are ways that we can impact and affect change on our emotional states. And that comes from addressing our cognitions, or the way we're thinking about something, our behaviors or actions, and then physiologically, so addressing things in our physical body. We know that cognitions and behaviors and physiology are all linked to emotion regulation. So when we make change in those areas, we can change and manage and control and feel more empowered over our emotional states. So when I talk to parents, those are kind of the three main areas we want to look at to see, are there things going on in those three areas that we can kind of coach and teach our kids to adjust so they feel more confident in their test.
So cognition are thoughts,
yes,
behaviors, and then their physiological body.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's start with the physiological body,
yes.
right? So what are some things we can do to help regulate that?
So we call it nervous system regulation. So this is where we're going to help our brain go from what we call the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, to the parasympathetic nervous system, or rest and digest. So the way we do that is typically through our senses. So accessing that part of the brain that's kind of deep in the brain, and we want to show the brain that you're safe. So a couple of ways to do that would be, so the first thing we want to do is try to think about, it's tricky because when we're in a classroom, some of these strategies are a little distracting, or a teenager would not want to do them in front of their peers. I've tried to think through what are some nervous system things you can do quietly that are not distracting, that are pretty discreet, in front of a classroom of people.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk through a couple. The first one, it's really simple, is sips of water, cold ice water, and if the teacher will allow, having like a small snack would be really helpful. There's a few reasons for this. What happens is when we eat or drink, we are forcing our body into digestion. Digestion sends signals to the brain that you're safe. When we are in fight or flight, one of the first things that happens is our body shuts off digestion. So when we're saying, hey, I'm giving you food, I'm giving you nourishment, I'm giving you water, and I need you to digest that, you're also communicating, I'm okay, and I'm safe, and I'm not in danger. So it helps the brain turn that threat response off. So little sips of water can be helpful through the exam. It allows, if you're, again, a teacher would allow like a banana or some trail mix on the desk. That would also be really helpful. So that's one really simple way to get your body out of fight or flight and into rest and digest, is to force digestion. And then the classic, this is an easy one, but and probably overused, but it's essential, is regulating our breath.
Yes, breathing, very important.
So, I would tell your teen to kind of do about 3 cycles of really obnoxiously slow, deep inhales and exhales. So in through the nose, and either out through the mouth or out through the nose.
Okay.
And you want your exhale to be longer than the inhale.
Yes.
It's very simple, but it's also very important when, again, we're trying to get our brain to turn off that flight response, to get our oxygen and carbon dioxide levels even. When we're in a threat response, we need more oxygen to send to different parts of our body to deal with the threat. So if we can tell our body, hey, I don't need that much oxygen. Look, I can calm my body by regulating and evening those out, then the kind of parts of the brain that are in that threat response start to kind of cool down.
And you said do that at least 3 times.
At least,
but
yes.
More is better.
I mean, honestly, doing that throughout the test is going to be helpful.
Okay, so for physiology, we kind of focus on reversing that panic response, or that stress response.
Yes.
So we drink, we eat, and then we
breathe.
Okay.
Yes. A couple more that I think are really, really helpful would be using our peripheral vision. It's a really easy one, and it's incredibly powerful, incredibly fast, and effective. So when we're in fight or flight, again, our eyes do tunnel vision. You don't notice it. It's not anything a kiddo would recognize as happening, but it's a part of that system. So when we open our eyes into the periphery, we're letting our brain know, hey, I'm safe, and it will help shift. So an easy exercise is just to kind of like look down We'll look straight ahead. And then for 30 seconds, you're going to take your eyes back to like your shoulder or this area. And you're going to do it on each side. So 30 seconds over here. And I recommend deep breathing while you're doing it. And your kiddo can look around and blink. You don't have to stare, but you're just keeping your eyes in the periphery over here for 30 seconds. And then I look straight ahead and blink a few times, and we do the same thing on the left. Okay. Very powerful. Instantly brings the heart rate down, blood pressure down. A lot of times you'll notice a lot of saliva being formed, which is good because that means I went into rest and digest. My body is working on saliva to help it digest. And so you know that it worked. Awesome. That's my favorite one.
Yes.
Another one is using cold water or cold compress on our vagus nerve. So what I would do is bring like a cold, icy bottle of water with you. Mm-hmm. You can even wrap like a paper towel around it. That way, as the ice melts, it makes that paper towel really cold. And then during the exam, you can place it on your wrists or on the side of your neck. And this is where the vagus nerve, which helps our central nervous system, gets that cooling effect, and it helps kind of cool down the nervous system.
Wow. Okay.
So these are fun, like little easy,
really helpful tricks.
Semi-discreet tricks that they can do during the test that are pretty fast and effective to help just bring the intensity of the anxiety down.
And so do you recommend that parents kind of talk through this with their kid ahead of time, maybe practice some of these things? Okay.
Yes. Talk it through, practice. They can do all of these, or if they kind of connect with one, they're like, yes, that one worked for me. Stick with the one. Stick with what works.
Okay.
And there's a ton of these ideas out there. There's about 1,000 of them. So I think it's really just about finding one that they feel comfortable doing at their desk in a classroom.
And that they feel like works for them.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. So what about cognition or behavior?
Okay. So cognition, I think this is where, we can, you're probably going to get eye rolls from your kiddos, but I still think it's really important for them to hear. Some of this is stuff that they might already know, but I do think reinforcing it can be really helpful. So the first thing is to recognize that they're probably catastrophizing. Teens do a ton of black and white thinking. It's just the nature of their kind of brain development. So, to them, one test feels very make or break. It feels this one test could be the end of the world. If I don't do well on this, I'm not going to do well in the class. I'm not going to do well on my GPA. I'm not going to get into college. I'm not going to, succeed in the things I want to do. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to help them zoom out. They might understand on some level that that's not an accurate way of thinking, but it still feels very
in the
real
moment for them.
In the moment. So we want to help them zoom out. We want to help them have perspective that, any one test or one quiz is not going to impact the entirety of your world and your life. And to really think through that with them. Like, here's where your grade is sitting. We can even do the math. Like, let's say you fail this test. Okay, your grade drops a couple of points. Is that the end of the world? No. So, I think just demonstrating to them however you can that this one test is going to be okay, no matter how they do on it. And then share examples of your own. So often in therapy, I will tell, the kids I'm working with, I've failed plenty of tests. I've struggled on tests. I've gotten C's on tests, and it felt very terrible in the moment, but I was okay. And it didn't affect me in a major way. So if you can share your own experiences with that, I think that helps them bring that pressure down, which is going to help them go into the test to feel like this is not such a threat.
And it seems like, too, having the parent kind of reduce the parental expectation of that test would also be helpful.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I find that most of the time the pressure isn't coming externally. It really is an internal thing. Yes. But they'll even get kind of in their own mind this idea that they're going to be disappointing somebody if they don't do well in it, whether it's a teacher or a parent, or they're not going to do as well as their friend. And so that line of thinking, again, sets them up to see the test as a threat situation. And our job is to really help them get out of that thinking that this test is not a threat.
Yes. Okay.
Some other things that I think would be really helpful is to go ahead and help them prepare for some inevitables. Inevitably on the test, you're going to come across a question you don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to come across a question that was like a curveball that the teacher said wasn't going to be on the test, and all of a sudden there it is, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have a question where you're struggling to get the information out of your brain. You're like, oh, I know it's there, but I just can't get it. That is okay, and that is going to happen.
Yes.
And if you go into it expecting that and understanding that that is likely, then again, it doesn't trigger that threat response. You're like, oh, okay, here it is. Here's that question that I knew there was going to be some on the test that I was going to struggle with. I think a lot of teens go into it thinking, okay, I've got to know everything. And then they come across a question they don't know, and bam, it feels like a threat. And the anxiety spikes, and the whole thing shuts down.
Gotcha.
So go into it expecting you're not going to know everything, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's fine. Yeah.
Be prepared.
Be prepared for that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's great.
I think another thing that is really useful is visualization techniques.
Okay.
Seems silly. And kids are going to roll their eyes and think it's silly. But it's really helpful. A lot of like sports psychology techniques use this. So visualizing yourself performing well, doing the task, seeing it in your mind, going all the way through preparation, getting up there, doing the task well, doing it calmly, completing the task the way you want to. In sports psychology, we know that when we do that visualization process, that we have better performance.
Wow.
And it really, really works.
Yeah.
But the trick is, like, this is not just a sports thing. You can apply this to any kind of performance, including academic performance. So I think it's helpful to have them kind of take pause and visualize themselves going into the classroom, finding their seat, doing a relaxation exercise, kind of starting the test, going through it confidently, checking their answers, turning it in, the whole thing. And to do it that without stress. And then that can have, a positive impact on their performance.
Okay, because a lot of that anxiety might stem from the unknown or not really knowing what to expect.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And even visualizing coming across a question you don't know, and how are you going to handle that, and like working through that in our own mind ahead of time.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's think. Are there any other tips you have to share with us?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's important to just talk about some of the behaviors. It's easy to forget some of the basics.
Yes.
Kids need, everyone, but our teens need a good night of sleep before their tests.
Sleep's so important.
And it's tricky because they're going to want to stay up and study and cram and prepare. But it really is essential that we get 8 hours of sleep. So as a parent, I think anything you can do to really, take the study materials away, really reinforce how important for the test and for their recall of that knowledge and for their ability to do anxiety management during the test, that they need a good night of sleep. They need their brain fully charged.
So you would tell them essentially that it's more important to get that good night's sleep than it is to cram those last few hours.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because when we're cramming and we're up late studying, we're essentially we're in a more kind of fight or flight state. Our nervous system is activated. And what we know about our brain in that state is we don't learn well. We don't encode information well. If we don't encode it well, we can't recall it well. So it really is a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. And it's associating anxiety with this task. So we really, again, don't want this task to be associated with a threat. So better to get a good night of sleep. And when we're sleeping and resting and taking time away from it, that is when our brain takes all that information that has been learned and studied and stores it where it needs to store it so that you can get it out on the day of the test. So you're not wasting time by not studying. You're allowing your brain to encode the information from your studying. And the brain needs time to do that.
Yes. Okay.
So sleep, and then, get those kids food.
Yes.
They don't like to do this sometimes. Most of my teenagers skip breakfast. They don't eat a good lunch. They're snacking on, kind of not the best food. But as we learned with rest and digest, we need really good nourishment in our body to signal to the brain that we're safe. So the day before, the day of, making sure that we're getting really good food in there frequently.
Good nutrition.
Good nutrition. I would say like high protein,
Mm-hmm.
things that don't cause sugar crashes or adrenaline spikes and crashes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay.
Avoid caffeine and sugar, things like that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think another thing we want to do during the test that you can encourage your kiddos to do is to, when they sit down to take the test, skip around. Start the test going through the questions they probably already know.
Okay.
So they are going to, this is going to help them because it's going to, one, build them confidence. Like, oh, okay, there are some on here I know. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be able to kind of just skirt through and answer those really quickly. And then as they're answering ones that they know, building their confidence is allowing the nervous system time to kind of adjust and adapt to the new testing environment.
Okay.
So by the time they get to the ones that might be more challenging, a struggle for them, their nervous system has already kind of cooled down naturally a little bit.
Okay. And so that's a good tip too for those ones when we're preparing them for the questions that they don't know or they didn't expect. They can go ahead and skip that one.
Yes.
And come back to it when we feel a little bit better about how we're doing.
Absolutely. Okay. Save those for last. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Get the confidence up, let your nervous system chill out for a bit, and then come back to those harder ones.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah. Another thing that they can try is, so when they notice that their body is starting to kind of maybe get a little anxious, we come across a question that's challenging us, that anxiety is starting to build in them, I think it's really important that they know that they can stop the test.
Mm-hmm.
There, a lot of feedback I get is, well, I can't, it's like the time's going, and really what is important for them to know is that regulating their nervous system is actually pretty fast. I mean, we can do this in 30 seconds to a minute.
Okay. So
if they can just stop what they're doing, pause, take that 1 minute to do one of those strategies we talked about earlier, it's going to help. And they're going to perform better. Mm-hmm. They're going to feel better. And the information can get out of their brain easier. So it is worth that time to just take those stops, take those pauses, and it's okay to do that. Mm-hmm. They're not doing themselves any favor by staying in the anxiety and trying to force their way through the test.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. What else?
I think one thing that is really important to consider is the importance of practice.
Yes.
So, I would not want to teach these the day before the test.
Okay.
I think it's important to teach these kind of early on, ahead of exams, maybe not even when an exam is on the horizon. Like if you know your kid is struggling with test anxiety, let's talk through some of this stuff when there's not a big test happening.
Okay.
So that way, some of this we can reinforce it when a test comes, but it's not new knowledge.
Yes.
And we've had time to practice some of this stuff in calmer situations, right, than when we're just in a stressful one.
So we don't want to overwhelm them with feeling like these are all new things they need to learn while they're also studying for their test. Okay.
And if they have time to practice some of the regulation strategies, some of the techniques and tips, their brain and body's familiar with it.
Yeah.
So when they get to the test and then go to use these, your brain and body are like, okay, yeah, I know what to do. So it's going to be more effective if we've had time to kind of practice this stuff before the test. Practice them during study time. While studying, okay, I'm going to pause. I'm going to do a regulation strategy. I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to do a peripheral vision technique, and then I'm going to restart. Okay. So your brain's already familiar with it. It knows that it's helpful. And then when you're doing it during the exam, it just comes more naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Fabulous. If we kind of have a kid and we have worked through some of these things and but we're still pretty concerned about their anxiety levels, when should we sort of know that we might need to reach out for some professional help?
Yeah. So, I do think it's important to talk to the teachers if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think we're looking at that discrepancy between what we know that they're able to learn and their knowledge base, and then what they're able to show when the time comes on these tests. And if you're noticing a big kind of gap there, then that's probably an indicator that we have a lot of anxiety going on. And then if, trying some of these things and working with your teacher doesn't kind of close that gap, then what that suggests to me is the anxiety is so big, so intense, it's so strong that there's not any room or space for the kiddo to even apply these tools, which would indicate to me that we maybe have a bigger concern that we need a little bit more support around, more practice around, more talking around.
Okay. So that would kind of indicate that maybe there's anxiety about things other than the test, that maybe there's other things that are
getting in the way of our functioning.
Okay. And then that is when we can reach out for help.
Yes.
Wonderful. Do you have anything else that would be really helpful for parents or teens to know?
Yes. I think, one thing, if we do kind of get to that point where we're trying to get additional support because just applying these on our own isn't effective. I think it's great to work with your school to see if you can get some accommodations. Typically accommodations for anxiety look like additional time on the test and or taking that test in a different environment that might be a little less stressful, a little less distracting. I think the additional time is so helpful because it allows for time to do these exercises and to apply the tools and skills, which when you're trying to do that during a 45-minute block can feel really stressful.
Yes.
And they feel like they don't have time to do these things. So if they get that extended time, then it allows them to feel like, okay, I can stop the test for a couple of minutes, work on my tools, get my body calm, and then kind of get back at it. So I think that extended time can be really useful for those that have a hard time applying this otherwise.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. I'm going to link some stuff for Grant Halliburton Foundation down below. No, you were great.
Okay.
You were great.